Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It gives you the tools and inspiration to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. This is where we explore how to cultivate remarkable cultures that scale and evolve as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
If growing people becomes the last thing, it's because the team is so busy or so myopic on focusing on numbers that people feel burned out. If you want your employees to really stay with you and to care about the company, you have to care more about them first. You have to care about their fears, their insecurity, their home life, their relationships. They have to care about their health, about them as humans. And if they feel so cared for, they're going to go through brick walls for you to build the company.
Hey friends, welcome to episode 111 of the Culture Lab podcast. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind accelerator program where culture leaders get hands-on support and guidance on how to reach their goals faster, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. CultureBrained connects you with outstanding peers on the same journey, but also with world-class experts, including people you know from the show. And they all help you identify and implement new, better ways of creating a culture where people do their best work. Check it out at tinyurl.com/culturebrained. And no need to write it down. There's a link in the show notes. If you've ever been a part of a growing organization, I think you'll know that there are unique challenges in building and maintaining a thriving culture, especially when your business expands and evolves rapidly. The very things that make a company successful in its early stages, like its early core values, its startup mentality, the close-knit team, they can become diluted or, even worse, slightly irrelevant as the company scales. I think it was Marshall Goldsmith who said, "What got you here won't get you there." And exactly because of that reason, I always wanted to speak to someone who has first-hand experience in scaling businesses and scaling culture. And today, my guest is Cameron Herold, the mastermind behind hundreds of companies' exponential growth. He earned his reputation as a business growth expert who guided his clients to double their profit and double their revenue in just 3 years or less. And he gained this reputation by doing the work in the trenches with those companies. In fact, he was an entrepreneur from day one himself. At age 21, he had 14 employees. By 36, he'd helped build his first 2 $100 million companies. By the age of 42, Cameron engineered GotJunk's spectacular growth from 2 million to 106 million in revenue and 3,100 employees. And he did that in just 6 years. In other words, here is someone who has plenty of personal experience to talk about when it comes to cultivating a culture that enables the business to grow and empowers the people who build it. Without further ado, here is Cameron Herold. Cameron, welcome to the Culture Lab.
Aga, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have you here. It's been such a long time that I've been admiring your work from afar. And then I happened to interview your sister without knowing that she was your sister. And at the end of that interview, she told me, well, one of the books that I would like to recommend is my brother's book. And she gives me the title, Vivid Vision. And I was like, seriously? So Cameron is your brother? Oh my God, we need to bring him on the show. So I'm so thrilled to have you here with me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're both kind of raving fans of each other. We watched each other grow up in our business worlds and running companies, and we both learned from each other too. She's got some really, really interesting skills around the culture and fun side of the business for sure.
Yeah, I admire her. And we had such an interesting conversation about fun at work. And I know that you come from a really interesting family. So I guess let's talk about that. What were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person? How did you grow up?
Yeah, so we grew up being groomed to be entrepreneurs. So my father was an entrepreneur, his father was the CEO, and then my mom's parents were both entrepreneurs as well. So we grew up in this very entrepreneurial family of people running companies. It's really all we ever talked about. And this was in a time when being an entrepreneur was not cool, right? Entrepreneurship only became cool around 97 or 98 with the rise of the first internet boom. But prior to that, if you were a child running a business or doing anything around business, you were kind of vilified. You were the greedy little capitalist kid that nobody liked, right? There was even a comic book called Richie Rich, and nobody liked Richie Rich as the character. Yeah, it was just this time period where we were shown to being an entrepreneur was something to go after, but it was never about the money. My dad showed us it was about controlling our time, being able to do what we wanted when we wanted, being able to have more fun at work and only work on the stuff that really fed us and delegate everything else. It was kind of like being able to cheat at work. We got to just only work on the fun stuff and delegate everything else to everybody else, which my dad showed us if we did that, the money would follow. So that's really where it all started.
What a gift to get from your parents. I mean, that's really wonderful because for the most of us, we grew up differently. We need to overcome all these misconceptions about what entrepreneurship means and what's involved. So I think it's such a wonderful gift to have parents who can guide you on this path.
Well, and it's not just my sister. My brother also runs his own company and has done for 25 years as well. So it really is all three of us that just set out on this journey.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm not surprised that at age 21, as I read, you already had 14 employees.
Yeah.
So, how old exactly were you when you became an entrepreneur?
So I did a talk that's on the main TED website. If you go to TED.com, the TED Talks. I did a talk there around 12 or 13 years ago about let's raise kids to be entrepreneurs. And I talked about all these little business ventures that I had as a child and how I was groomed to be an entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial lessons I had through childhood. But my first entrepreneurial venture that I remember, I was 7. And my mom came into my bedroom, and I had the long telephone with a long extension cord in my room with the door closed, and I had the yellow pages in front of me, and I was lying on the floor. And I remember doing this, and I was cold calling all of the dry cleaners in the city of Winnipeg, Canada.
What?
And I was phoning the dry cleaners, asking them how much they would pay me for coat hangers. Because back in that day, it was 1972, dry cleaners would pay you a recycling fee for every coat hanger, usually 1 or 2 pennies per coat hanger. And so I was asking them if they would give me 3 cents per coat hanger because I just wanted more. And the dry cleaner that I was talking to said, no, I'm only going to give you 2. And I said, well, how about 2.5 cents? And he started laughing and he said, kid, how old are you? And I said, I'm 7. How about 2.5 cents? And he said, okay, we'll do 2.5 cents. And that was when my mom walked in and she heard me negotiating. And when I hung up the phone, she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm selling coat hangers to a dry cleaner. And she said, well, where are you going to get the coat hangers? And I kind of looked at her and started to cry because I realized that for the last week I'd been lying to her. And I went and opened up my closet and it was filled with coat hangers.
Oh my
And
God.
for the last 5 or 6 days, I'd been going door to door in all the neighborhoods around the house, telling my mom I was going out to play with friends, but sneaking coat hangers in. And then I couldn't figure out how to get rid of them. So that was the first kind of buy low, sell high negotiation, split the difference, have confidence, cold calling. I learned all those lessons at 7. And then it just went from there. And I probably had 14 or 15 different businesses that I could tell you about right now by the time I was 18.
Yeah. Yeah. Though, I mean, oh my God, that sounds completely nuts. I had a friend
Yeah.
like that, and we actually ended up going into business together. I remember him selling his mom's jewelry. It wasn't very valuable and it was stuff that she didn't want anymore. And he would just sell it at school to the girls and then use the money to buy something else and then resell it at the similar age. So I can picture that, but it's still quite extraordinary.
There's a lesson in there as well. And the lesson is to parents, let your child run the business by themselves. Let them run it for 1 day or for 4 days. Don't try to build a website for your 12-year-old's business. Don't go and buy them a lemonade stand. Don't stand out on the street corner waving cars in. Don't go door to door to help them sell cookies. Let your child do it and learn from it. And when they come home and they're struggling, coach them. How did it go? What went well? What didn't go well? Try this and then send them back out again. Because your child is going to learn from talking and the reflective observation and by doing and the experience. But when the parents are sitting there running their little child's business for them, the child isn't learning and the parent should just go start their own business instead.
And you know what? I think it's equally true for leaders at work as well.
It is
It's like
very true.
don't do your employees work and don't tell them exactly what to do. Just give them some space to experiment and do it their own way, and then coach them
And then coach them.
and help them reflect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
So you continued on that trajectory, obviously. I know that by 35, you helped build your first two $100 million companies.
Yeah,
By age of 42, you engineered Junk's growth from, I think, 2 million to 106 million in revenue. And you did that in just 6 years. Is that right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems basically you've been on a rapid growth trajectory for your whole adult life.
Well, there were a couple other points around 1-800-GOT-JUNK that I think are salient points as well. So in 6.5 years, when I was the chief operating officer, we went from 2 million to 106 million in revenue. I joined as the 14th employee. When I left, we had 3,100 employees system wide. We landed 5,200 individual unique stories about the company. So we got a lot of press coverage for what we were doing and how we were doing it. We were even on Oprah. But the other point is we also ranked as the number one company to work for in British Columbia 2 years in a row. And then we ranked as the number two company in all of Canada to work for. So we were this very strong culture magnet. And at the time that we ranked number two to work for in Canada, the other two best companies to work for in British Columbia or in Vancouver, one was Lululemon. It was the startup Lululemon, and Chip was doing an amazing job with this culture magnet of Lulu that we know today. And the second was the Vancouver Olympics, because it was back in 2005, 2006, when they were building up that 5-year plan out to the Olympics, and they were that culture machine as well. Those were really fun times, and we learned a lot about what it took to grow a great company because of the culture side of the business.
Yeah. Thank you for painting that detail in, because this is obviously what we're really interested in. How do you scale a business so fast while at the same time cultivating a remarkable culture, a sort of culture that enables people to do their best work, and a sort of culture that, as you say, is a magnet for talent. So during that whole period of building these amazing companies, and I know that it's a hard question to ask, but if you were to isolate maybe one or two most powerful lessons that you've learned about scaling the right way, what are they?
So the first one, and I told Brian this when I first got to the company, it's going to be three actually, now that I think about it. Within about the first week or so that I was there, I said, we have to raise our prices by 40%. You're not making money. The employees aren't making money. The franchisees aren't making money. We can't deliver on our quality focus areas. We've got all these people working hard and nobody's doing well. So we're going to raise our prices 40%. And if we go bankrupt doing that, so be it. But we're going to go bankrupt running your way anyway. We positioned ourselves as the FedEx or the Starbucks of junk removal, right? We're premium price, premium service, premium brand. And because we did that, we could afford to hire the right people. So that was one, right? You pay peanuts, you get monkeys. But if you charge enough, you can hire great people and you can deliver. That was one. Second thing that I told them almost that same week was we're going to grow very quickly because we're going to engineer that growth. We have to be a little bit more than a business and a little bit less than a religion. We have to get into the zone of a cult. And that's where the culture will emerge. And I taught them how to become more like a cult and less like a business, right? With the mantras and the logos and the phrases and naming the rooms and cheering people on and praising and titles and it was all very cult like. So that would have been the second. And then the third was we really focused on growing our people, right? My obsession was to flip the org chart upside down with the CEO at the bottom, supporting the C level, supporting the VPs, supporting the managers, supporting the employees, almost like an inverted pyramid, right? Where the CEOs, and if you build the company inside your core purpose and your core values, everybody is supporting everybody, then you win. So that was my whole focus, was grow your people, grow their skills and grow their confidence.
So I want to unpack this. I will go to the second point that you've mentioned first, which is create something that is more than a business and less than a religion and be cult like. Can you define cults for our listeners to give us a little bit of context? What do you mean by that?
Sure. And I was actually a guest on a podcast called A Little Bit Culty, and it talks about when corporate culture goes too far, right? What's the edge between manipulating people? How do you use core values to attract the right people and to get people focused on the right things? But if you go too far with core values, you're kind of guilting people, you're gaslighting people, then you're going too far with them. It's a real fine line between leveraging what should be culture and when you go too far. You know, a traditional cult would be when people leave their families and they put all their money into this group and they put all their energy and time into this group and their whole world becomes this group. That's when you're going too far. But I don't want a company where people just show up at 9 and leave at 5 and don't care, right? So we wanted a company where people would proudly wear our company logo on their back, where people would love to be at every company event, where they would come for drinks after hours, they would join the sports team, they'd go for runs in the middle of the day together wearing company logos. Is that too far? I don't know. It was an amazing place to work because we loved people and we took care of people and we, made sure they had fun. Is doing a daily huddle when you cheer and you share good news and you share missing systems, that's kind of culty. It's not abrasive and it's not pushing people in the wrong way.
Yeah, I'm glad that you elaborated on that because I think an association that a lot of us might have with a cult is that it has this charismatic leader who actually takes advantage of people. And as you say, people leave their families, people leave their old beliefs behind and just start believing in something that very often turns out to be very toxic and very abusive. And obviously, we're not talking about that.
There are a couple of types of leaders there, though. You do have the very charismatic leader like the Steve Jobs or the Richard Branson or the Henry Fords, which can be the cult of leadership and that kind of charismatic leader. Or you can also have a very strong company culture, like Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, that level 5 leader with the drive and the personal humility, right? And that's more the disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, where everyone are driving, working hard together and driving hard. And those are often the leaders that maybe we don't know, but there is a culture still. Every company has a culture, right? It could be a very boring culture, or it could be a very driven culture, it could be a very fun culture, but we all have a culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
A family has a culture. It could be a very positive family values, lots of family traditions, or it could be a very negative, toxic, angry culture at your family.
Yeah, totally. And I think the challenge is to make sure that the culture that you have in your company is the kind of culture that enables your business and also enables your people to do the best work. And so I want to tap into your third point when you talked about where your focus was, which is really giving a lot of attention to growing your people, particularly if you are in a scale up. How do you go about that? Because obviously, when you are in a scale up, I think it's a little bit like, I don't know, being strapped to a rocket, right? It's accelerating, you're trying to hold on to it, and there are so many things to do. So sometimes it can be the last thing on people's minds. How are we going to grow our people? So,
Right.
can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. The reality is it needs to be the first thing. If growing people becomes the last thing, it's because the team is so busy or so myopic on focus and on numbers that people feel burned out. If you want your employees to really stay with you and to care about the company, you have to care more about them first. You have to care about their fears, their insecurity, their home life, their relationships. They have to care about their health, about them as humans. And if they feel so cared for, they're going to go through brick walls for you to build the company. So that's part one. Part two is to remember that if you're going to scale up your company, right, if you're going to double your company in size every 2 years, or as we did, we doubled every year for 6 years in a row, then you better double the skills of your people too, or every year or two, you're having to fire them and hire new people, and that just gets hard. So what we did is we focused almost like as if our people were climbing up two ladders. And I was in the house painting industry. So I used to have to climb up these very tall 40-foot ladders that when you get to the middle, they would sway and they'd get a little bit kind of scary. So I pictured all my employees climbing up two ladders right beside each other. with their left hand and their left foot climbing up the skills ladder, and their right hand and their right foot climbing up the confidence ladder. And if I grew their skills, they'd get more confidence, which would allow them to take on more skills, which would build their confidence, right? If I grew their confidence, they'd be willing to try more or learn more. I'd grow their confidence. They'd be willing to take feedback and not take it negatively because they knew they were safe. So it was all about grow skills, grow confidence, grow skills, grow confidence. That was just the thought process that I had and that I work with companies on today, is to do that. Otherwise, you're going to grow through your people too quickly.
Totally. And so that's one side of growth, and definitely one way to help your company grow, that you grow the people that you already have within your organization. And then obviously, as your company grows, especially when we're talking about such rapid growth, you need to hire more people. And very often you double the number of your people on the team every so often. And so it can be quite overwhelming, right? And my question is, how do you maintain what's best about your culture when you have such huge numbers of people joining your organization? And very often they don't really understand yet what you stand for and who you are as a collective. And so, in my mind, it's really easy to dilute what's really best about your company. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is when you need to indoctrinate the people into the cult, right? Into the culture very quickly. And that starts with before you even interview them. It starts with sending out the vivid vision for your company, which describes your company 3 years in the future as a 4 or 5 page written description of your company, how it acts, how it feels, how it operates, so that everyone who reads the vivid vision of what your company looks like in 3 years, half of those people say, "No way, I don't want to work there." So you push away those people, and the other half say, "Hell yeah, I want in. I want to be a part of this." Then you interview very, very hard for behavioral traits and core values fit first, not skills. The skills come second. Okay. You're still going to interview for those, but I don't care if you have the skills if you're the wrong culture fit for the company or you're the wrong core values fit for the company. So the only people that I start bringing into the interview process are the ones who already live the core values fit. That's for me where culture alignment starts, is core values and the belief in the vivid vision. If we have that, then we can interview to see if people have the skill set. So that tends to be how people will come in saying, "Yeah, let's do this," is they know what this is before they even get there. And they're selling you on why they're going to be a good fit for that. If you compromise culture, that's when it'll go wrong.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about vivid vision, because I think it's such an important element. And I find it surprising that very often in companies, there is lack of clarity about what is our culture and how we want it to evolve, what we want to maintain, what we want to change. There's very often lack of clarity around where we are going exactly as a company. So you talk about vivid vision, as you said, as a document of 4 to 5 pages that describes in very, very vivid detail where you are going as a company. And the timeline that you attach to it is 3 years. I have a question about that. Why three, not five, not 10, or why not 1 year?
Yeah. If you lean too far out, you fall over, right? 10 years out is so far out there that, oh, we can just deal with that later. We don't have to worry about that. We can deal with it in 5 years. It's just so far out there, right?
Mhm.
So there's something different. There's a BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal that Jim Collins talks about. An example of that would be Elon Musk saying that they want to colonize Mars. That's a 20 or 30-year stretch. That's very different from a vivid vision. And if you only go 1 year out with your vivid vision, if you're only describing your company 1 year from today, it probably looks too similar to what you already look like. So there's not enough excitement, there's not enough creative tension, there's not enough opportunity to create change and to get people excited about joining for. So 3 tended to feel like about the right amount of time to push it up.
So, Cameron, quick question and quick clarification around BHAG. So, typically, BHAG is going to be this big, hairy goal that you might be able to accomplish in 10 years from now, or even more than 10 years from now. You are working in that direction, but then you want to have a vivid vision of what your company is going to be like in 3 years from now while you are progressing towards BHAG.
Correct. So here's how I visualize it. I visualize every business like a jigsaw puzzle. So remember when we were a child and someone handed us a jigsaw puzzle? The most important thing to start was the picture on the front of the box. That's the vivid vision. What are we building? What's it look like? So if we can see the vivid vision, we go, okay. Then we open up the box and we look for the four corners of the jigsaw puzzle. Well, the four corners are your core values, your core purpose, your BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal, and the 1-year plan attached to your vivid vision. Well, the BHAG is never a measurable goal. By Jim Collins' definition, it's a 20 or 30-year stretch, something that from the inside of the world seems plausible and from the outside probably seems impossible. It was like Microsoft putting a computer on every desktop, and they don't even make computers. It was Nike saying that they wanted to crush Adidas back in 1972, or Boeing to democratize air travel or colonize Mars. It's these long-term pushes towards something that people get excited about and they rally towards. The core purpose is what Simon Sinek popularized in his book, Start With Why. Simon was on our board of advisors 5 years before he wrote that book. 5 years before his TED Talk, he was on our board of advisors. He helped me identify my core purpose is to help entrepreneurs make their dreams happen. So when I was asked to be on your podcast, I'm like, hell yeah, because it's a group of scale-up entrepreneurial organizations. That's a yes. But if you were a government organization or a government podcast and you'd interviewed my sister, I would have said no, because I don't work with government organizations. I don't work with NGOs. I don't work with it's not my zone, right? So it's all related to those corners.
And thank you for that illustration of how you let your why make decisions, because it's such an important thing, right? Very often people will think, is it really so important? And people think about purpose or the why in terms of the purpose statement. But it's actually, yes, you might have a statement and obviously it's helpful. But what's really important is that it's a tool that helps you to course correct all the time and ask yourself, is this thing that I'm doing essential to us serving our mission and fulfilling this purpose, right?
It's absolutely becomes a filter for every decision I make in my business. It's the reason why I said yes to writing 6 books. Each of my 6 books is aligned with helping entrepreneurs make their dreams happen. My speaking events are, my coaching of entrepreneurs is, my COO Alliance is, my Invest in Your Leaders course is. It's all completely aligned. And I say no to lots of things because they're not completely aligned with that core purpose. And then my employees understand that as well. They come in with an idea and they're like, oh yeah, dumb idea, because it's not aligned with the core purpose. It's not aligned with that BHAG, right? My BHAG is to replace vision statements with vivid visions worldwide. Because the one sentence vision statement doesn't work. It's useless.
And very often they're also so egotistical, right? It's about being the leader, being the first, etc., instead of talking about the impact that you want to have in the world. These traditional vision statements talk about who the company or what the company is going to be in the future, but who cares really, right? People care about what you can create, the impact that you can make. So I'm 100% aligned with this BHAG. We're probably going in a similar direction here. I love this visualization, the puzzle and the 4 corners of the puzzle. It's such a great way to talk about what's really important, because obviously when you are building a company, when you are in a scale up, there is so much ambiguity there. You really don't know what's in the middle. But as long as you have these 4 corners, you have something to work with.
Well, and then we go to the sides of the puzzle. So the first side of the puzzle are the people side. And that's the recruiting, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, leadership development, and the offboarding of the wrong people. And then it's strategy. So it's strategic thinking, it's getting mentoring, it's being in mastermind communities, it's the coaching, it's the what if, it's the scenario planning. And then the next side is the meeting rhythms. And that's your annual, quarterly planning meetings, your financial reviews, your one-on-one coaching, leadership team meetings, etc. The fourth side are the financial systems. And in the middle of the puzzle, all the colorful objects is the big shiny stuff. That's the cultural perks that you layer in. But the media has hurt us. The media has talked about cultural perks like the free massages and the lunches, and people think that's culture. That's not culture. Those are perks.
Yeah. The only thing that they do really is that they start creating entitlement, because obviously, especially in tech industry, we've seen this so much that basically people will not join a company anymore if certain perks are not in place, but they don't contribute to a sense of fulfillment. They don't contribute to a sense of engagement. It's just something that is taken for granted. and has zero impact on culture.
You can have them as long as everything else is in place, right?
Yeah.
You can see a family that is very rich with very spoiled children because they get all of the perks, all the toys. But you can see another family that is very rich where their kids are aligned with the core values, they're aligned with the mission of the family, and they have the same toys. But because they're so aligned with the core values and the culture and the family unit, the toys do mean something to them.
Oh, I love that. That toys mean something. Yeah.
Years ago, my sister, one of her children, got a little bit snobby, and they were about 12 years old, and she was saying something to her friends of like, "We're going to France this year." And my sister pulled her child aside and said, "If you ever say something like that again in that kind of a tone, everything gets fucking sold, and I'm not kidding, try me." And my sister was dead serious. Like, she would rather be like, "Nope, nothing," right? So that's culture. That's the alignment with core values, and that's firing people who break the core values, and most companies won't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. What you hold people accountable to, what you reward, what you expect, and all this stuff is really super important. Oh my gosh, we could take this in so many directions, but you mentioned that one of the sides of the puzzle is getting support and participating in masterminds and support groups as a professional. Many of our listeners are chief people officers or people who are in charge of a culture shaping initiative. I know that you run a community, and some of them, by the way, are a part of our community, CultureBrained community. And I know that you run a community for COOs, COO Alliance yourself. Why do you feel it's so incredibly important for people, particularly in scale up organizations, to have peer support?
And I think it's important for every level and for every type of function that you're in. So I've spoken at 3 or 4 conferences for HR people. I spoke at the SHRM conference. I was on the cover of some magazine for HR people one time. I've spoken at call center conferences. It's all because that function, those functions need to be around their peers from other industries to learn and to experience and to get support and to get better. And I think it's an opportunity for companies to try to plug people into that. What I noticed for the COOs, and the reason I started the COO Alliance, it's for anyone who's second in command to the CEO. So it could be a VP of operations, it could be a COO, it could be a general manager. As long as they're the second in command to the CEO, there was no place for them. There were places for marketers and lawyers and engineers. There were countless groups for entrepreneurs like, Vistage and YPO and the Genius Network and Maverick and the Entrepreneurs Organization, countless groups for entrepreneurs, but there was no group for that second in command to grow their skills and to get systems to actually scale up their businesses as well. And when they went to events that were only focused on entrepreneurs, they didn't fit in or they never got a chance to talk because the CEOs were always talking over top of them, right? They needed their own safe place.
Yeah. And I see the same thing happening with chief people officers, particularly with respect to really focusing on culture, because it's very hard to have these conversations in different forums. And so this is exactly how we felt about creating this community, the Culture Brained community. People needed a space, and especially now in this era of hybrid and remote work, where we're still, I think, navigating an uncharted territory. People need a space where they can figure out what's the future, how are we going to
Totally.
evolve, what are going to be next practices, because obviously whatever we did in the past, it's completely irrelevant now. Thanks to speaking to that. And since we are talking about COOs, I want to share something with you, and something that I want to ask. More and more frequently today, I'm seeing senior people leaders who move from people operations into COO positions. And I think it's a smart move for businesses, by the way, because these people, obviously, and any business relies on their people to a huge extent. So it only makes sense to me that some of the senior people officers would move into that role. Why do you think, first of all, it took such a long time for these moves to take place? And what is your view on people, senior people moving into a COO role?
There's a subset of the kind of chief HR officers, the chief people officers that are perfect fits to move into the COO role. And the core is they have to be really good at the project management, the time management, the business side of the business, right? The reason that it took so long was traditionally the head of HR was more of a process, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, payroll, And then when it became more about people, about caring about the impact of people, right, where they were no longer the union steward, that they were empowering and growing people, and they were good at the cross-functional teams, they were good at the remote teams. They learned a different subset of skills. But HR used to be very different. HR used to be almost a subset of finance, where it was all about making sure the documents were there and people were getting paid on time and we were tracking vacation time. That's no longer what, that's HR, but people is a different role. So that's why it's become very popular for sure, and why it can work.
Yeah. And speaking of our listeners being in those positions, the majority of them, I want to ask a question that I think is on many people's minds. So I've noticed that a lot of people these days have been moving from a role of a chief people officer or a head of people and culture position in a corporate environment into a similar role in a scale up. And it's a totally different situation. And I see a lot of people feeling very confused and lost. And so I wonder if you can speak to what is different about being responsible for people, for the people function in a large organization, or a part of people function in a large organization, and being responsible for people function in a company that is in hyper growth.
It's interesting. I even talk about that a little bit. My newest book is actually launching tomorrow. This is my newest book called The Second in Command.
Congrats.
I talk about the COOs sometimes coming from big companies into smaller scale up organizations as well. So culturally, they're very different, right? Culturally, the smaller entrepreneurial organizations have to bob and weave. They make it up on the go. They have to change directions occasionally. They don't have all the answers. They often don't have the bigger budgets as well. They don't have the depth of leadership around them and the depth of people strength around them often. So they're building and growing that as well. Very similar when you come out of a big organization and you're in the people role, you probably are surrounded with lots of people in the HR function as well, and often not so in the smaller organizations. I think as well in the smaller scale up organizations, the CEOs often have an idea of what they want from the people side with no idea how to do it. And in the bigger corporate worlds, they've seen it around enough, so it's more plug and play, would be my gut around it.
Yeah. And so if you were someone who joins an organization that is a scale up and that is on this rapid growth trajectory, what priorities would you set for your first 90 days?
Okay, I'm going to talk to two parts here. Before I answer that question, for every company that I've ever coached, for every member of our COO Alliance, I tell them they have 4 core goals for the company. The number one goal that they all have to have is employee net promoter score. The number 2 goal they all need is their customer net promoter score. The number 3 goal is a dollar figure for profit, and the number 4 goal is a dollar figure for revenue, and they're in that order. If you don't obsess about your employee net promoter score first, nothing else matters. If you have very, very happy employees, very, very engaged employees, they'll go through brick walls for you to take care of your customers. And then your customers are super happy. But if all you care about is your customers and profit, employees feel like the third priority. They feel like the redheaded stepchild. They don't feel as loved. So when you love bomb your employees, they'll love bomb your customers, and then you can charge whatever you want. So in the first 90 days, and I even speak to this in the Second in Command book, but it's very similar. In the first 30 days that you're there, your job is to grab a notebook and a pen and sit in on every meeting that you can, walk around the business and observe, read emails, listen to phone calls, sit in on board meetings and write down ideas and do nothing. Like, I think we should fire Bob. Great. Write it down. Don't tell anybody. I think we should hire Kathy. Cool. Write it down. Don't tell anybody. We should change this. Cool. Write it down. Don't tell anybody. We need this software. Awesome. Write it down. Don't do it. For the first 30 days, come up with all your ideas of things that need to happen. In the next 30 days, walk back around the company, sit in all the meetings, talk to everybody, and test every one of your ideas. Hey, I was thinking of Bob. What do you think about Bob? How is Bob really doing? And test your own hypotheses on all of these and try to sell yourself against what you thought you should do. So if I think I should hire Kathy, I'm going to try to prove that I'm wrong and maybe I should never hire Kathy. I try to test my own hypotheses and check in on myself for that next 30 days. Now, after 2 full months of seeing all these ideas and testing all these ideas, I can stack up in month 3 which ideas I should do first. And I'm going to do the very easy ones, the low hanging fruit ones, the ones that take almost no time or people involvement, so that I can do it, get a bit of a success, and the people around me will go, "Oh, we did something, it worked and it wasn't hard. Oh, they're smart. I trust them." And that builds your base. So by doing 4 or 5 or 7 very easy to do initiatives that don't take up a lot of time and money, all of a sudden you've built the trust in the base of the leadership team and the people around you and the people who report to you, which gives you allowance in the second quarter to start doing the harder projects like putting in place an ERP or a full company reorg or retitling, right? So do the easy stuff first. That's my approach.
Yeah. And what do you say to your CEO during those first 2 months? Because I think very often in rapidly growing organizations, there's a lot of pressure to get things done very fast.
Yeah, I think you have to sit down with the CEO and say, this isn't why it's going to happen that way. Here's the process that I'm going to follow and why I'm going to follow it. Now, remember, most entrepreneurial CEOs and scale ups don't want a 12-page document handed to them. They want a half-page summary. So if you just say, my first 90 days, month 1, month 2, month 3, and here's 5 bullet points of what I'm doing in month 1, 5 bullet points of what I'm doing in month 2, 5 bullet points of what I'm doing in month 3, and kind of the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and that's in a half page, your CEO will nod their head and go, got it, I like it, go for it.
I love it.
But if you sit there and try to tell them, if you sit there and try to explain it, if you give them a big long, they're not going to read it, they're going to get frustrated, and they're going to push back.
So true. Thank you. What great advice. Oh my gosh, I wish we could talk longer, but I want to be respectful of your time. So let's shift gears and move to the rapid fire questions.
Okay,
I have 5 questions for you. And the whole idea with the rapid fire questions is that you'll try to answer all 5 in under 2 minutes.
got it.
Let's try it. So at CultureBrained, we are on a mission to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. And I want to ask you, what is your number 1 tip to bring more fun to the workplace?
It's to remember that none of this actually matters and we're all going to die and we may as well have fun along the journey because we're all just walking each other home. This is just what we do to make money. So as an example, for our COO Alliance event that's coming up in April, we have onesies coming and all of these boring normal COOs are all going to be wearing animal onesies, and we're having the COO Olympics, and we're going to do wheelbarrow races and egg tosses and 3-legged races, and we're just going to be silly at this beautiful hotel venue just because none of this actually matters, and we may as well have one of my core values is have some effing fun.
Thank you. I love it. Well, what is the sign, or perhaps even signs in plural, that a company culture needs some work, or perhaps even a major overhaul?
Yeah, well, it's when you're losing great employees, right? It's when you have trouble attracting great employees. It's when people don't show up at the company events. And it's when you do a data rating and you do an employee net promoter score, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastically would you recommend this as a place to work? If your number is less than positive 50% on a scale of negative 100 to positive 100, then you know there's a problem.
Do you admire any companies for the culture? And if yes, why?
I admire a number of companies for parts of their culture. You know, I have a company that I admire called Acceleration Partners that has 350 employees and they're 100% remote and they always have been. I admire Apple for this like drive for simplicity and this absolute drive for the BHAG of creating these insanely great products to challenge the human race. I admire, Richard Branson and the Virgin Group with just this silly entrepreneur. So I admire pieces of lots of companies. I admire Herb Kelleher from Southwest Airlines. People say, how do you get all your employees to smile? He said, it's easy. We hire smiley people.
Yeah. What books on culture, on philosophy, on leadership would you recommend to our listeners?
Insanely Simple, which is about the simplicity systems around Apple, is very, very strong. And then I think for today, with the time that we're going through, going into this recession and possibly a period of stagflation, read a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And it talks about really, really strong leadership systems that we can all put in place today. Oh, and then the classic of all time of like 35 years around people management and coaching is The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard and Paul Hersey. Still to this day, I think probably the best book on growing people.
So, final question. What is one thing that our listeners can do tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating a culture that is going to help them and their teams to bring their vivid vision to life.
Every time that you give an employee a new project, praise them for at least 2 they got completed. Every time you show an employee one thing they did wrong, tell them 2 things they did great. Every time you tell somebody that there's a new goal for the company, praise for 2 goals you just had. I think we need to praise people twice as often as we criticize, or we need to thank people twice as often as we give them feedback. We just need to do that twice as often.
I love that. Cameron, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thank you.
I wish we had more time together. Maybe we need to bring you back and expand this conversation. It was so much fun. For those of our listeners who want to learn more about you, about your work, what are the best places for them to visit, particularly online?
For sure. Definitely take a look at my Invest in Your Leaders course. It's all the core skills to grow people. So that's investinyourleaders.com. Take a look at the COO Alliance. If you're a company doing at least 5 million or greater, let's get your second in command in. And then all 6 of my books are available on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes as well. And then also check out my Second in Command podcast. We never interview the CEO. We only interview COOs of some of the great brands.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Anis El Nabarawi, production manager.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Thank you for joining Cameron and me for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring, or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who might appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you want to dive deeper into the topics that we discussed on the Culture Lab podcast, and if you want to participate in one-of-a-kind Culture Accelerator program and join a global community of peers, you might want to check out the CultureBrained community. CultureBrained is for people who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you're in charge of a culture-shaping initiative, and if you believe that work should be synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, I think you'll feel at home in the CultureBrained community. You can learn more about it at tinyurl.com/CultureBrained. And there is a link in the show notes. And don't forget to join us in 2 weeks from now for a deep dive with Shani and I, where we will talk about the culture of care and how to prioritize mental and physical well-being at work. Thanks again, and see you in 2 weeks. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.